If there's anything people love as much as decorating their houses or trick-or-treating during the Halloween season, it's watching scary movies. Whether it's a horror TV show, film, book, play, piece of art, or more recently, visiting a haunted house, be it real or orchestrated, as long as humans have created art, we've enjoyed imagery of the dark and disturbing. But why is this? It doesn't seem to make much sense after all. Why wouldn't we as humans always choose sunny skies and rainbows over ghosts or swamp monsters? Kittens and puppies over spiders or vampires? Ice cream over serial killers or sandy beaches over demonic possession? The Sound of Music over Seven or the Barbie movie over Oppenheimer? Indeed, this human draw towards depictions of the spine-tinglingly terrifying brings to mind Agent Smith's infamous quote from The Matrix. Quote, "Did you know that the first Matrix was designed to be a perfect human world, where none suffered, where everyone would be happy? It was a disaster. No one would accept the program. Entire crops were lost. Some believed we lacked the programming language to describe your perfect world. But I believe that, as a species, human beings define their reality through suffering and misery. The perfect world was a dream that your primitive cerebrum kept trying to wake up from." End quote. Or, if we want to be a bit more highbrow about things, one might also quote the Bible, Romans 5-3 and 4, which reads, quote, "We also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope." End quote. All of this might be a tad heavy, but the truth is that the human fascination with darkness seems, at first glance, contradictory to the idea that we seek the light in all its forms. So, why is that? Well, many psychologists and social scientists link our fascination with the grim, dangerous, and macabre, what we'll just call scary stuff, to our basest human instinct, survival. In other words, at a biological level, we have an innate drive to live and reproduce. So because of that, we engage in lots of conscious and subconscious actions to ensure that. Conscious acts involve avoiding dangerous places, dangerous people, or dangerous activities, while subconscious acts involve everything from flinching when we're scared to something called apophenia. This common, fascinating, but perhaps at times problematic phenomenon involves perceiving patterns where there aren't any, which can be why people love conspiracy theories or why researchers have a hard time parsing correlation and causation. A subset of apophenia is called pareidolia, which is the visual aspect of apophenia, or why we see bunny clouds in the sky or faces in the moon. Whatever the specific instance, though, some scientists contend that humans developed these habits to detect dangers around them and thus have a bigger shot at survival. After all, if you can see the saber-toothed tiger stalking you in the grass today, you might have a better chance of eating the nearby woolly mammoth tomorrow. Keep in mind, though, that listening to the Serial podcast or watching The Exorcist is a far cry from actually thwarting the plans of a murderous cult or fighting off killer clowns from outer space. I don't think most of us would actually enjoy trying to survive a zombie apocalypse or being stuck in a serial killer's death maze. Enjoy reading the Zombie Survival Guide or Ghost Hunting for Dummies all you want, but the vast majority of us wouldn't want to live that reality, no matter how much one might boast to the contrary. All that being so, why? Why do we enjoy horror if we don't actually want to experience the horrible events we hear, see, or read about? Well, because it's safe.
We better get away from these parts. It isn't safe.
Why?
I'm frightened. The monster.
We can indulge our innate survival instinct while not actually risking our ongoing survival. We can sit in a movie theater eating tasty popcorn as aliens blow up New York or demons possess unsuspecting innocents. We can jog on a treadmill in a gym full of people while listening to podcasters discuss Ted Bundy or watching hikers run away from a killer Bigfoot. We can even just stay in our homes wearing a comfy sweatshirt, sitting in a cushy chair, and maybe eating some pizza, all while watching Michael Myers stalk unsuspecting teens in The Waking World or Freddy Krueger go after them in The Sleeping One. Admittedly, there are those who enjoy real ghost hunting, but even they attempt to rationalize the endeavor, seeing it as a scientific verification of life after death, not something that's putting them in actual mortal danger, at least for the most part. Therefore, as our communities grow safer, the more we seek, in an equally safe way, to satisfy our innate instinct to detect threats and, through whatever means necessary, survive them. This fascination is nothing new. In fact, some of the earliest images ever created depict the dangers posed to humans by both animals and other humans. For example, the Lascaux caves in France, painted circa 17,000 years ago, contain beautiful tableaus of horses, deer, bison, and extinct animals called the aurochs and the megaloceros. One of the most famous depictions is of a bison seeming to gore a man who, in his shock, drops a chicken-topped staff. Not only do researchers think that this is evidence of prehistoric spiritual belief, perhaps the figure is a medicine man dropping his staff that helps him wield, you guessed it, magic, but it also shows both an attack and a death caused by a wild animal. There's also the caves in Morella la Vella, which contain the oldest known image of humans attacking one another with bows and arrows. Once humans settled into civilizations, circa 10,000 BCE, and then much later developed writing, circa 3500 BCE, tales that had long been circulated verbally were finally written down. One such tale that survives today is the Epic of Gilgamesh, an epic poem from the 3rd millennium BCE about the king of Uruk, named Gilgamesh, and his hero's journey to obtain fame and immortality. A story that is both engrossing and brutal, Gilgamesh doesn't just clash with gods and man to get what he wants, he is literally attempting to conquer death. Although he ultimately fails to do so, his great contributions as a ruler at the end of the tale please the Sumerian gods to such an extent that they assure him he will live forever as a near-mythical figure to his people. To quote the classic line from The Sandlot, quote,
"Heroes get remembered, but legends never die."
End quote. The Gilgamesh tale is not alone as an ancient text depicting scary stuff. Ancient Greek and Roman mythology is replete with gods, monsters, love, hate, torture, murder, incest, just keeping it real, revenge, heartbreak, and death. Achilles in the Iliad fought brutal battles to ultimately destroy the entire city of Troy. His Greek compatriot Odysseus in the Odyssey then overcame nymphs, a visit to the underworld, a cyclops, the six-headed Scylla, the whirlpool Charybdis, the rock and the hard place, and a really pissed-off sea god to return to his wife, whereupon he slaughtered a house full of suitors to reclaim his place as ruler of Ithaca. These dramatic themes carried through all ancient Greco-Roman media: poems, plays, literature, dialogues, mosaics, pottery, and sculpture, giving us Hercules, Medusa, the Minotaur, Cerberus, harpies, hydras, chimera, Pegasus, satyrs, griffins, and sirens. And this doesn't even scratch the surface of the internecine nonsense the gods and goddesses embroiled themselves in on a nearly constant basis. Overall, this mythology was so formative to our collective civilization that in scholar Joseph Campbell's famous The Hero with a Thousand Faces, he explored what he called the monomyth, as in a human myth, the archetypal story running through most of human legend. This story he called the hero's journey, a tale of struggle, loss, and ultimate triumph that forms the backbone of both Gilgamesh's journey and Odysseus's Odyssey. As Campbell wrote, quote, "A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man," end quote. This trope remains so powerful that it undergirds some of our most famous stories today, from Jane Eyre and The Lord of the Rings to Luke Skywalker, Katniss Everdeen, and Harry Potter. And yet, as Campbell also pointed out, as long as we've had heroes to admire, we've had monsters to fear. As he wrote, monsters are, quote, "some horrendous presence or apparition that explodes all of your standards for harmony, order, and ethical conduct," end quote. The very word itself implies this as monster, derives from the Latin word monstrum, which referred to something unnatural or unpleasant. As psychologist A.J. Marston and Professor William Nesbitt pointed out, monsters are, quote, the embodiments of our fears, concerns, and anxieties, urgent messengers from the depths of the mind, end quote. Thus, just as heroes reflect the best expression of the human experience, monsters have long been a way for people to embody their numerous anxieties, be it the fear of pain, loss, hurt, heartbreak, the unknown, the other, and most of all, death. As Emily Dickinson once noted, one need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors surpassing material place, end quote. Fast forward to Europe in the Middle Ages, and medieval poetry, folklore, and popular culture were filled with tales of violence, doom, and gloom. The most translated poem in Old English literature was Beowulf, the 10th century story of the eponymous 6th century Gothic hero's various deeds. Among other great feats, Beowulf fought the monster Grendel, and then its mother, before becoming the king of the Danes, until his death 50 years later after slaying a dragon. Although Grendel's appearance was not explained with specifics in the poem, he was referred to as a Skaidugenga, or shadow walker, a night-goer and giant forever shrouded in darkness. As a character, he has also been related to the biblical Cain, another powerful narrative force in our culture, as it was said that various monsters and demons sprung into the world when Cain slew his brother. In this case, Beowulf managed to slay Grendel, thereafter cutting off his head to keep and display as a trophy before also slaying Grendel's mother. Later in the medieval era, there emerged a literary and poetic theme called chansons de geste, which were epic fictionalized tales of historical figures and their various deeds, often involving romance, betrayal, heroism, death, and revenge. They were the dramas of their day, not just read but recited and even sung at large public events. One of the most famous is the 11th century Song of Roland, a fictionalized retelling of Charlemagne's military commander Roland at the Battle of Roncevaux Pass in 778 CE. At the battle, Roland is betrayed, outnumbered, and then dies, whereupon his betrayer is imprisoned, tried for treason, is found guilty in trial by combat, and then ripped apart by horses.
Carles vireis nostrem perere magnes, et anstus pleins ad estean Espagne, tres calamer, punctis later Atene, miat castel qui devan ir Remagne, turnet sides, nies remes a Flandre, for Saragots qui estan in montagne.
Later chansons de geste focused more specifically on heroes of the Crusades, and these themes were carried into those tales in spades. Then there is the late medieval Canterbury Tales, Geoffrey Chaucer's epic poem that features knights, crusaders, pilgrims, maidens, monks, nuns, peasants, farmers, craftsmen, cooks, merchants, outlaws, poachers, kings, talking animals, Greco-Roman deities, including Jupiter, Venus, Pluto, and Proserpina, Genghis Khan, the Grim Reaper, called Death in the story, the Pope, angels, Satan, and God. The stories themselves recount numerous epic tales of passionate romance, fulfilling friendships, cured illnesses, unbearable betrayals, sadistic stabbings, painful poisonings, and bloody beheadings.
Weeping and wailing, car and other sorrow ignoanoch, on even and the morwe quod the merchant, and so doon other more that wedded been.
One can find just about everything in Chaucer's many stories, all 17,000 lines of it, that reflected the highest highs but also the dangerous, perilous lows of medieval life. Into the early modern era, Europe entered a particularly turbulent time. As we've discussed, there was quite a lot of violence and unrest during the Reformation, the belief pervasive that heresy was not just dangerous, but like a deadly communicable disease to be suppressed at all costs. Popular culture reflected this darkness, particularly with the emergence of a movement called millenarianism, or the belief that the end of the world was at hand. This is why Protestants viewed the Catholic Pope not just as incorrect in his beliefs and teachings, but as the Antichrist bent on bringing about the apocalypse. Catholics held the same belief, yet in reverse, seeking out and burning Protestant heretics wherever they were found. This social violence, side by side with the wars of religion, and the fear we discussed previously that witches were everywhere having parties with the devil, gave rise to frequent depictions of something called the Danse Macabre, or the Dance of Death. Part of the Memento Mori artistic movement, the goal was to remind the viewer that death was both an omnipresent and inevitable part of life, to invoke both the terror of death and a reverence for life. Side by side with the popularity of depicting the four horsemen of the apocalypse, humans in this time of extreme physical and spiritual trauma embrace the macabre as an outlet for their ever-present and entirely understandable existential angst. This context breathes real life into William Shakespeare's line from the 1610 play The Tempest, quote, "Hell is empty and all the devils are here," end quote. During this chaos, there was a glimmer of hope, however, in the form of the scientific revolution. From roughly the 1500s on, various European intellectuals began to trade in religious explanations of natural events for rationalism, giving rise to the modern fields of astronomy, physics, mathematics, chemistry, and medicine. These developments laid the groundwork for the Enlightenment, the period during which the intellectuals of the movement, called philosophes, applied the parameters of the scientific method and rational analysis to more abstract concepts like human nature, morality, natural rights, politics, and economics. This is not only how we now have calculus, thanks for that, Isaac, but also free market economics and the political beliefs enshrined in the Constitution's Bill of Rights. One might think that as a result of all this common sense, European culture moved away from, if not entirely abandoned, its fascination with the dark, mysterious, and macabre. Yet as soon as the Enlightenment took hold, reactions to it also emerged in the form of an emotive, passionate movement called Romanticism. The Romantics argued that life was neither logical nor entirely bound by science, as in reality, human beings were frequently irrational and deeply emotional. Gothic literature and poetry were key expressions of this movement, and often portrayed characters haunted by the past, decaying physical landscapes, claustrophobia, unrequited or tragic love, revenge, persecution, imprisonment, murder, and supernatural events. Thus we have stories like Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, Frankenstein, and the many tales of the Brothers Grimm in Europe, alongside American tales like The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and the poetry of Gothic paragon Edgar Allan Poe. These narratives are dark and mysterious, haunting and at times violent, often featuring passionate, emotive characters bound by their emotions and frequently persecuted by antagonists bound by a cold and calculating rationalism that is eventually their downfall. So Dr. Frankenstein, an academic who thought he could use science to conquer mortality, only brought about the death of his beloved and the birth of a monster. That the violent supernatural fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm went through 7 editions between 1812 and 1857 and featured modern staple characters like Rapunzel, Hansel and Gretel, Cinderella, Rumpelstiltskin, Little Red Riding Hood, and Snow White is a testament to Romanticism's cultural popularity. Without a doubt, the American Civil War intensified Romantic and Gothic culture in the United States. Over 620,000 Americans, both North and South, died in this conflict, which was 2% of the total U.S. population and around 10% of the total male population, ages 18 to 49. To be clear, that means more men were killed in the American Civil War than nearly all other U.S. wars combined. If that doesn't put things into perspective, that would be like fighting a war today in which 6.4 million men were killed in a 4-year period. By comparison, 7,000 servicemen and 8,000 contractors have died between 2001 and 2023 in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. Most of the soldiers who fought in the U.S. Civil War were also previously civilians, not career soldiers, but instead young men who left home to fight and simply never returned. This inflicted deep emotional trauma upon American society, which in turn caused people to embrace Gothic and Romantic tropes, in particular a late 19th and early 20th century movement called spiritualism. Not only did people more intensely embrace dark and disturbing themes in art, poetry, music, and literature — this is not when Edgar Allan Poe lived, but when his work became widely popular, for example — but there was a marked rise in seances, fortune-telling, and spiritual mediums claiming that they could commune with the dead. This is when magicians as popular entertainment became veritable rock stars, which explains the near mythic popularity of Harry Houdini, although ironically Houdini himself loathed spiritualists and illusionists who claimed they had actual supernatural abilities. It also became popular to take pictures of dead relatives before burial. Funerals became large and overzealous productions some historians have referred to as, quote, orgies of mourning, end quote. And as we've discussed at length, the macabre aspects of Halloween became far more intensely celebrated than ever before. If that wasn't enough, this is also when popular culture more actively embraced what we today would call true crime. Social violence was a part of everyday life in ancient, medieval, and early modern Europe and then America, especially because police did not really exist until the 19th century. Before that time, social policing, i.e. people inflicting violence upon one another in retribution for crimes committed in a vigilante-like manner, was far more common, with imprisonment being a penalty often imposed before one was punished with a fine, torture, or execution, as opposed to prison being the punishment itself, as is the case today. Thus, with the late 19th century rise in Gothic culture, spiritualism, and fascination with the macabre, people also became deeply fascinated, if not obsessed, with tales of violence and crime occurring in the real world. Why else would we today know about, many people still be fascinated with, and we at times fictionalize actual violent crimes and criminals like Jack the Ripper, active in 1888, H.H. Holmes, active between 1891 and 1894, the Lizzie Borden murders in 1892, or the Villisca Axe murders of 1912. This fascination demonstrates an undeniable mixing of the real and the imaginary, of the violence we fear alongside the knowledge we crave. As Oscar Wilde noted in his famous Gothic novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, quote, I knew nothing but shadows, and I thought them to be real, end quote. Significantly, spiritualism was revived after World War I due to the enormous destruction and death toll of that conflict, causing society to double down on these various dark, macabre, and violent themes in both real and imaginary life. Incidentally, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes fame was one of the revival's greatest champions, thus his comment that, quote, where there is no imagination, there is no horror, end quote. Yet his beliefs in the supernatural actually led to a massive fallout with former friend Harry Houdini, who decried Doyle's advocacy both privately and publicly until his death. Despite this contretemps, the morbid imagery of violence, darkness, and death was soon permanently embedded in popular culture due to the rise of mass media through more widespread literacy, the advent of the radio, and then the creation of cinema. Therefore, more and more people could not only read stories and poetry about the dark and mysterious, but they could also listen to an on-radio reading of Frankenstein or go see a film about vampires. They could hear true crime reports of violence and death recounted on their evening radio shows, or go to the movie theater and watch the Phantom of the Opera attempt to seduce a young ingenue. Both the hero's journey and the monsters he battled against, which emerged thousands of years ago, were as popular as ever, and media along these themes exploded accordingly. Thus, Halloween as a widely celebrated holiday became incredibly popular into the 20th and now 21st centuries, as did the images we associate with it, in large part because it was and is a time when people could and can marry a love of holiday celebration to a fully entrenched fascination with darkness, gore, and wickedness. Then either explore or even disseminate that fascination across mass media. In so doing, we could and still do satisfy our deep psychological need to confront in a safe and controlled way the very things that scare us most, and perhaps cheer for the hero on his journey along the way. As Bram Stoker wrote in Dracula, quote, "It is only when a man feels himself face to face with such horrors that he can understand their true import," end quote. Or perhaps, more fittingly, to quote one of the scariest movies ever made,
"What an excellent day for an exorcism,"
end quote.